Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
It's your boy Taco Bell Wani, and it is time for the Bellator 198 main card predictions. Bellator 198 takes place this coming up weekend, I believe April 28th if I'm not mistaken. Yep, it's for sure April 28th. It's a 5-fight main card that's going to be headlined between Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor, and Frank Mir, who's coming over from the UFC off of a USADA suspension. But this is a heavyweight fight between two legends of the sport that could have happened years ago, as both of these guys are toward the end of their careers, of course. You guys know how Bellator likes to do the heavyweight thug dizzle, you know what I'm saying? You get some of the heavyweight legends coming over that fans still want to see. They got the names Frank Mir, Fedor, everybody knows them and loves them as far as, you know, the veterans of the sport, the fans of the sport that have been around since they've been doing their thing. And they're going to be headlining this event in the Heavyweight Grand Prix. Of course, the Heavyweight Grand Prix is the Bellator bracket tournament they have for the heavyweight title right now. And whoever wins the entire tournament ends up becoming Bellator's heavyweight champion. This fight's taking place in the bracket. We've already had two fights take place in the heavyweight bracket, of course, between Chael Sonnen and Rampage Jackson, where Chael Sonnen advanced. And also we had the fight between Matt Mitrione and Roy Nelson, where Matt Mitrione actually advanced. So I'm going to go over my bracket predictions at the end of this video. So let's jump right into the first fight of the main card, where Conor McGregor's jiu-jitsu coach and homeboy Dillon Danis is going to be making his MMA debut. Dillon Danis is the guy that just paid Conor McGregor's bail last week or the week before, when Conor McGregor went crazy in Brooklyn, got arrested after throwing the dolly at the bus. None other than the bull Dillon Danis showed up to pay his bail, said, "I didn't even think twice." I think he sat there through the court hearing. Pretty much he's Conor McGregor's A1, not since day one, but either way, he's one of Conor McGregor's good friends now. It's also the guy, if you recall, whenever Conor McGregor fought Nate Diaz, and he was like, "Yo, when his jiu-jitsu coach, we're gonna get that motherfucker too," you know what I'm saying? Because he said he switched sides or whatever. So that's Dillon Danis. He's 0-0 as a pro. This is his very first professional fight. He's gonna be taking on Kyle Walker. Kyle Walker's professional record's a little hard to find. Well, on Bellator.com they say 0-4. When you look at Sherdog, it says 2-3, and then when you go to like Tapology, it's like 2-4. So I'm just gonna give him the 2-4 record. Kyle Walker, he's got some pro fights, but I'm still going to be picking Dillon Danis to get the win here. As I said, Dillon Danis bonded Conor McGregor out of jail, and he's one of his teammates and jiu-jitsu coaches who's going to be looking to make his Bellator debut here against Kyle Walker, who lost 2 of his last 3 fights via submission. But Kyle Walker does have more fight experience, so I'm going to be edging out with Dillon Danis to win his MMA debut here. I don't think he would have really took this fight if he didn't feel like he was ready, you know what I'm saying? I don't think Dillon Danis is really struggling for money, or one of those guys that, you know, got to fight to put food on the table, as his boy is Conor McGregor, you know what I'm saying? And I'm sure Conor's not just paying his bills, but I'm just saying, I don't think Dillon Danis is some broke bum dude hanging around Conor McGregor paying his bail and shit like that. So I don't think Dillon Danis is going to be taking fights, you know, that he doesn't feel comfortable with, you know, or his team, not him necessarily. I'm not saying he's cherry picking his opponents, but since this is his first pro fight, he's going to have to ease his way into his pro career, get some experience under there. So I think this is going to be a good fight for Dillon Danis. I think he's going to be the better grappler in this fight, as he's a submission specialist. He could also be evenly matched in the striking, though. We don't know much about Dillon Danis' opponent here. He hasn't fought in the UFC or Bellator. He does have some pro fights, but you don't know the level of competition Kyle Walker was really fighting against. And Dillon Danis trains with one of the better teams in MMA, you know what I'm saying, SBG, with Conor McGregor and those guys. So I got Dillon Danis winning his Bellator debut. Next, we're moving to Neiman Gracie, another submission specialist, versus Javier Torres. Javier Torres, again, more overall experience, but he does have less Bellator experience. Javier Torres is a Mexican fighter that has 10 wins and 3 losses in his career. This will be his Bellator debut, though. He's 0-0 in Bellator. He's going to be fighting Neiman Gracie, who's got 7 pro wins, 0 losses, undefeated. 5 of those wins have came in Bellator. So kind of like Dillon Danis, you know what I'm saying? Neiman Gracie's a guy that came over at as a grappler, a submission specialist, and Bellator was able to match him up the right way to where they're not just feeding him to the wolves, you know what I'm saying? Bellator's, if they've got a guy that's got some star potential or something like that, Bellator is really good about building their guys up and not just fucking throwing them to the wolves immediately. So if you got Conor McGregor's teammate, Kimbo Slice Jr., Aaron Pico, they got a lot of dope-ass prospects up and coming that you want to build the right way. Bellator can do that because their level of competition in Bellator is so spread out. There's some guys in Bellator who can just get signed fighting their UFC debut, so they might not be on the skill level necessarily of most Bellator veterans. And then at the same time, if as these guys continue to get better and they want the real test, Bellator's got the guys for you too that have been fighting over in Bellator. So I really like Bellator and their, you know, in the way that they build their prospects up, like Neiman, Gracie, Dylan, Danis. So I think they're gonna do a good job with that. So Neiman Gracie's a guy who's 5-0 in Bellator. He signed to Bellator when he was just 2-0 as a pro. So you can tell they had their eye on him early, which they've got to do. Bellator's got to get their, you know, they got to build some of these guys up where the UFC's going to snatch them. These Aaron Picos and all these guys I just named, Bellator's got to get them when they're really young, because by the time they're probably 21, 22, or however old, they're probably ready looking at the UFC for the big money. So if Bellator gets behind them when they're younger, you know, they more show that loyalty to Bellator and stuff. So I think that's a dope thing about Bellator as well. So as far as Neiman Gracie versus Javier Torres, I'm going to be picking Neiman Gracie to get the W. Torres has never been submitted in his career, but he will be making his Bellator debut against the undefeated submission specialist Neiman Gracie, who has won 6 of his 7 fights via submission. So he could be the first guy. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the first guy to submit Javier Torres, as he submitted 6 of his 7 opponents already. Javier Torres has a solid record of 10-3, but he's never fought in Bellator or the UFC, or fought anybody aside from a split decision against Julian Lane that has even competed in the UFC. And Julian Lane, if you don't remember who he is, that's the guy, let me bang, bro, from The Ultimate Fighter. So he fought in The Ultimate Fighter, but never the actual UFC, never Bellator, and that's Javier Torres' most experienced opponent, or his highest named opponent, you know, that has like UFC Bellator experience. With that being said though, and that's just Ultimate Fighter experience, but either way, I'm picking Neiman Gracie to come in here and possibly be the first guy to submit Javier Torres in his career. That's definitely what Neiman Gracie is going to be looking to do. As I said, 6 of his 7 pro wins are all by submission, and he's undefeated. Going to be looking to remain undefeated against Javier Torres, and I'm picking him to get the job done. Next, we're moving to Rafael Lovato Jr. versus John Salter. This is actually going to be a really good fight. Both of these guys are undefeated in Bellator. John Salter 5-0 in Bellator. Rafael Lovato Jr. 7-0 in Bellator. I believe Rafael Lovato Jr. is also 7-0 though. As a professional, he's older in his game. I believe he's like 34. He's transitioned to MMA a little later. He was a guy that competed in jiu-jitsu and also was a jiu-jitsu instructor, but now he's fighting for Bellator, and he's undefeated as a pro, 3-0 in Bellator. So Rafael Lovato Jr., very high-level submission guy. He's going to be fighting John Salter, who's a very well-rounded fighter, who's got a lot more experience and also more Bellator experience. I'm going to be rocking with Salter to win this fight. As I said, John Salter's a little more experienced. He's also finished all 15 of his opponents. John Salter's like 15-3, and literally all 15 wins are submissions or KOs. So he's a fucking finisher, which is dope to see when a guy has 15 wins and they're all finishes and he's not losing much. That's pretty dope, especially for Bellator. He's a high-level guy over there. That you'll see out of Bellator. This is going to be one of the better fights on the card. You know, the first 2 fights, Bellator, a little bit of prospect building with Dylan Danis and Neiman Gracie, might not be the highest level of mixed martial arts, but this John Salter versus Rafael Lovato Jr. fight's a serious fight. It took me a while to, you know, really think about who I'm going to pick in this fight. Had to do quite a bit of research, watch a couple fights before I made my prediction. Ultimately ended up going with John Salter, as I said. He's going to be fighting Rafael Lovato Jr., who's less experienced in MMA, but he's very high level in jiu-jitsu. This could be a close fight, as both of these guys are on win streaks in Bellator, as I said, undefeated. I'm going to be going with Salter, though, who's a little more experienced, and also, since Rafael Lovato Jr. is more of a submission specialist, and John Salter's got 8 wins via submission, it's not like he's just some geek, you know, off of his back, some geek off the streets. John Salter's at least got some jiu-jitsu skills to be submitting these guys. He might not have fought somebody as high level in jiu-jitsu as Rafael Lovato Jr. That's very that's a very real possibility, but he's a well-rounded fighter. So Rafael Lovato Jr. is going to have to be able to take him down, and if he can't take him down, he's going to have to be able to, you know, contest in the striking with John Salter. And then when he gets him to the ground, if he does, he's going to have to be able to submit John Salter, who's got some submissions of his own. So he's not just a scrub down there. So I'm picking John Salter to come in here and be the more well-rounded fighter and get the W. Next, we've got Sam Sicilia versus Emmanuel Sanchez. This is a fun fight because it's like Bellator versus the UFC. Sam Sicilia is a guy coming over from the UFC. He was 5-7 in the UFC, but he had 12 UFC fights. He won his first Bellator fight, Sam Sicilia, after leaving the UFC on a 3-fight losing streak. But Sam Sicilia did spend 5 years in the UFC, and he went 5-7 in that time. When he left, he was riding a 3-fight losing streak that started off with a loss to Do Ho Choi. Then he lost to, I believe, Gabriel Benitez and another guy who was making his UFC debut. So Sam Sicilia was definitely skidding when he was let go by the UFC and signed by Bellator. But then he came in and won his Bellator debut against Marcus Galvao, I believe, and a guy that Emmanuel Sanchez also recently has a W over. So both of these guys recently beat Galvao. But Emmanuel Sanchez is a Bellator veteran who's been fighting some of Bellator's better featherweights for like the entire last year. He fought 3 times in 2017, Sanchez, so he was very active. He's one of Bellator's better featherweights. He's riding a 3-fight winning streak, most recently with the win over former Bellator champion Daniel Strauss. He was a 2-time Bellator featherweight champion. Emmanuel Sanchez got a W over him. That was a high-level opponent. And I believe Daniel Strauss, the former featherweight champion, could be a higher level opponent than Sicilia has fought to date. Aside from the guys he was losing to, you know, when he was leaving the UFC, like Do Ho Choi is probably a better fighter on paper, you would think, than Emmanuel Sanchez, but he lost to Do Ho Choi. Other than that, though, other than Do Ho Choi, Emmanuel Sanchez could very well be one of the best guys Sam Sicilia has fought, even though he's over in Bellator. Sam Sicilia beat the former Bellator champion. Emmanuel Sanchez beat the former Bellator champion Daniel Strauss, riding a 3-fight winning streak. Sam Sicilia is coming over from the UFC on a 3-fight losing streak, but picked up a W in Bellator. So both of these guys could be very evenly matched, but it's going to be a great fight to watch, to see like one of UFC's journeymen versus one of Bellator's top 15 guys. Emmanuel Sanchez could very well be ranked in, if they had a ranking system, Emmanuel Sanchez could very well be in the top 5, top 15 of the featherweight division. Sam Sicilia is a guy that would be unranked in the UFC, but it's going to be really interesting to see how a guy who's been fighting the best guys in the world as far as the UFC is concerned does against one of Bellator's better featherweights. So I really got my eye on this match. I think it's going to be fun for that reason. It's kind of like Bellator versus the UFC, but I think Emmanuel Sanchez is going to pull out the W, as he's been more active lately, fighting 3 times in 2017 and also starting to fight the higher level guys that Bellator has to offer. So I think he'll be able to get this W in here versus the UFC veteran Sam Sicilia. With that being said, moving to the main event of the evening. Not too much commentary on here because it pretty much just goes back to my Bellator bracket prediction. Fedor Emelianenko versus Frank Mir. Frank Mir coming over from the UFC, of course, on like a USADA suspension. Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor, you know, one of the arguably the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time. People, you know, always give him that credit, or at least heavyweights of all time. Did his thug dizzle before MMA, you know, not in the UFC, not in Bellator, but he was still recognized as one of the greatest heavyweights to ever do it. Fedor Emelianenko, man, coming over to Bellator, he's coming off of a loss to Matt Mitrione. If you remember, there was like that double knockdown in the first round. Matt Mitrione recovered quicker, though, was able to finish the fight off. Fedor Emelianenko and Frank Mir are going to be fighting in the heavyweight Grand Prix. The winner of this fight is going to be taking on Chael Sonnen to continue in the heavyweight Grand Prix, since Chael Sonnen beat Rampage Jackson. I'm picking Fedor Emelianenko, who oddly enough has been more active as of late, but it's because Frank Mir has been serving a little bit of a suspension. But either way, man, this is a tough fight. Frank Mir's probably even the favorite, I would assume. I mean, I could see Frank Mir coming in here and looking really, really good in this fight. If Frank Mir, you know what I'm saying? Because when he left the UFC and he had that USADA suspension, I believe it, I don't remember the exact details. I think there was the horse meat argument or kangaroo meat argument or whatever. But all I'm saying is, even if it's not kangaroo meat, anything, Frank Mir and Bellator, a lot of these guys in Bellator doesn't have USADA, so I don't know the exact details of the differences between their drug testing policy, but I'm just going to say that you would think that a lot of these guys in Bellator who have less lenient drug testing, maybe there's some type of edge they can get compared to when they were fighting in the UFC. And I'm talking about, you know, like there's stuff that used to be legal before USADA came around and they were super strict. I don't want to jump to like TRT, but let's just say, use TRT for example. Let's say, because TRT used to be legal, right? And combat sports or whatever, it became illegal and a lot of guys had to get off of it. Well, with that being said, what if that's something that's not illegal over in Bellator? So Frank Mir, maybe it'll really help him come out and look great like he used to be, former UFC heavyweight champion. Who knows? Same with Fedor, though. He didn't look terrible in his fight versus Matt Mitrione, but we don't have a lot to go off of. Fedor didn't look great in his fight versus Mirko Krokop, I believe he fought before coming to Bellator. He got his hand raised, but a lot of people felt like it was a robbery. So neither one of these guys have been super active, but they're both heavyweights, so it's going to make it fun. This is a fight that if it would have happened fucking, 9 years ago, it might have been the biggest fight everyone's talking about right now, but it's a little bit out of date when you consider that. Fedor Emelianenko, I believe, might be 41. Frank Mir, somewhere from 39, somewhere up there as well. So this is going to be one of those heavyweight legends fights at Bellator happening in the heavyweight Grand Prix. I don't know how the fight's going to go. I don't know who's going to have it that day. You know what I'm saying? We ain't seen Frank Mir fight since for a while now. I believe he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, man, it's going to be a fun fight. In my bracket, I predicted Fedor, so I'm just rocking with that because that's what's in my bracket. I don't know how Frank Mir's going to look coming back off of suspension. I don't know how Fedor's going to look coming back. We didn't get to see a lot out of him in the Matt Mitrione fight. So who knows how this fight's going to go. All I know is the winner moves on in the heavyweight Grand Prix, and I'm edging it out with Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor. With that being said, I just want to get into my bracket predictions because that's part of why I'm going with Fedor, not doing too much of a technical breakdown on these heavyweight legends of the sport, you know what I'm saying? So with that being said, so far my Bellator bracket predictions have all been correct, as you see. Matt Mitrione beat Roy Nelson, barely moved on. You see I got him losing in the next round. But either way, Matt Mitrione and Chael Sonnen have both moved on, as I said in my bracket predictions. I also have Fedor and Bader. So we'll see what happens with Fedor here, if he's able to beat Frank Mir and keep my bracket alive. But either way, I got Fedor winning the main event in this fight tonight. With that being said, this is the Bellator 198 main card preview and predictions. This card, of course, is coming up this Saturday. There's not a UFC event for the next 3 weeks until UFC 224. So if you're going to be wanting to watch some MMA in the next 3 weeks, might want to tune in to Bellator 198 because this might be the last Bellator or UFC event until UFC 224. So with that being said, I'll definitely be watching Danis' MMA debut. Ayman Gracie looking to remain undefeated. We got some UFC versus Bellator going on, and of course some heavyweight legends going at it on this card. Can't be mad. Looks like a fun night of MMA. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments about Bellator 198. I'm out. And as always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell right next to it so you're notified every time I upload a video. I'm out.
This is #1 bullshit.